welcome back to Crypto Bits. I'm your host, Brittany, and today we have Jerry Chan joining us. Hello, Jerry. Welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Very good. Pleasure to be here.
Jerry, do you think you could start us off by just how you got involved with Bitcoin?
Lots of wow. Okay, so you're gonna have to stop me because I tend to ramble on with such a with these high level open ended questions. I think I would say I started in Bitcoin around 2012. I may have heard of it in 2000 end of 2011, but I sort of like really read the white paper and sort of bought some Bitcoins or tried to buy some Bitcoins in 2012. And it was really just initially I thought it would never work. It was just another silly idea. And then I think the more I read the white paper. It was short, so actually, if it was any longer, I probably would have never gotten into Bitcoin, you know, because I don't have the patience. At the time, I was working at Goldman Sachs, and I don't have the patience to read like a white paper longer than 10 pages about some random project, technological project. So it was short enough that I just gave it a read, and it was very easy to sort of digest as well. And the thing that stuck out to me was it made it made references to an economic model, right? Or an economic reason that appealed to greed and fear, the two forces of capitalism. And that kind of was, that actually surprised me. I did not expect any academic paper to go into that level, go into that facet of economics and so or macroeconomics models. It's something that I could relate to because at the time at Goldman, I was working on the FX trading desk with the trading strats and the traders, and generally everything you see is macroeconomics, and there's no hard and fast answers. It's always like, well, it works because the market works this way, right? So it was very interesting when I read it in a white paper, and it kind of stuck out to me. And I was like, well, okay, this is not a run of the mill white paper. This is not just some geek in like some academic in an ivory tower coming up with some theoretical solution to money, like as if that hasn't been tried before 1,000 times and failed. So that kind of made me look twice. And so it was about 2012 I got into Bitcoin.
Fantastic. Well, Jerry, I know you are. I've heard you talk about being a capitalist before, and I wanted to touch on that. Because many BTC maxis will say, the free market decided and BTC won. So, as a capitalist yourself, what is the common response you have for people who make this claim?
The easiest response is the people making that claim aren't real capitalists because they know that there is no end of the game. There's no end game in capitalism. It's all about your time horizon, right? What may look like a win in the short term could be a loss in the long term, right? What could be a great business strategy that works for 2 years and 3 years may be terrible for 20 years. So what may, as long as well, I guess you're referring to the whole BTC versus BSV thing. So in that respect, the project's only 10 years old. I mean, the internet was invented in 1970, mid 70s, right? How long did it take before something really actually useful for the human race or society in general come out in the internet? It took about 25 years. And so to say that it's over and we've won because the market says so, and even there's a caveat to that. The market, what market? You mean is there an actual fair market in crypto? Is there a fair unmanipulated market? I claim no, right? I mean, people will say, oh, look, there's that number, but yeah, okay. How many friends did you have to get together to make that number and put on a web page so that you can point to that number and said you won? Okay, if that's what you want, if that's your goal, okay, I guess you won according to those rules. But the world doesn't care because the world, goes on longer term thing, right? So as long as the project's alive and people are working on it and building stuff on it, I think it's actually a success. Price is just one aspect of success, not really the defining aspect.
It's a very eloquent answer, and I like it a lot because, yeah, how do you define success? And like you said, the analogy with the internet and everything, it's very true. We're still very early stages of development here. But I want to go back in time a little bit, and I want to talk about BTC's early days. And specifically, we got Segwit and we got Taproot, we got all these things. I want to go back in time, back to Segwit. How did we get Segwit, even though 70% of the miners voted against it? And can you make the distinction and touch on the Hong Kong agreement and the New York agreement, the differences between those, and just kind of run us through that whole spiel?
Oh gosh, you're going to test my memory now. I'm going to first put out a disclaimer that everybody who's a scientist or who's worked in a courtroom will know is that memory's a little bit holy, right? It's like full of holes, like cheese. So I will try to recount what I recall. I definitely knew this stuff a lot better, say back in 2017, but that's already been like 4 years ago. So Segwit in general was okay. So it came about during a time in Bitcoin's history where there was already a very large disagreement between the people who thought that Bitcoin needed to scale globally, and in order to do so, the simplest way was to just go back to what Satoshi Nakamoto had outlined, right? Satoshi Nakamoto, undisputably, even in BTC camp, right, it said that eventually everything's going to coalesce into data centers. And you're going to have just basically large data centers be the miners. And that already happened by 2016, 17, right? You already had ASICs and everything. And, the argument that Satoshi never foresaw that is just ludicrously idiotic. I mean, there's no way that Satoshi was so blind and stupid that he didn't know the existence of ASICs or GPUs, right? Just because it wasn't explicitly mentioned doesn't mean anything. So it was already in a time when centralized miners have already, started it started going the way Satoshi indicated. And the other thing that Satoshi said was that, this block size limit was put there. Actually, Hal Finney convinced them to put it in there because Hal had a paranoia that he said maybe, some government agencies, or I don't know, maybe just trolling internet people from 4chan, like, 4chan Paul, or, those crazy like troll groups would just play around and just for nothing other than malicious fun, mess up the whole Bitcoin network, all right, and reset it, right? Because all they would need to do is spin up enough nodes, and in the beginning it wasn't that many nodes. Maybe you spin up 50, 100 machines on AWS, or then you can just overwhelm the network and start. And then everybody who'd be running honest nodes would probably just say, yeah, this is probably not a good idea. It's not going to work. Look, like people can totally just ruin it for us. So let's give up on it and do other things. And so in that sense, I suppose from one perspective, Hal was perhaps right, but we'll never know because that attack never happened. But you could say that never happened because of that. I don't know. The other angle is that, okay, from Satoshi's perspective, sure, maybe you're right, maybe you're wrong, so we'll put it in for the time being. And even in the code itself, it says, we can probably remove this once, after block number 100,000 or something like that. The thing is that the idea was that you can remove it after Bitcoin has a price. Because once Bitcoin has a price, again, back then when it was added, it had no price. There was, how much was a Bitcoin? $1, $2, 5 cents? Nobody knew because there weren't any exchanges. There was no organized exchanges anywhere. And so if once Bitcoin does have a price, then it becomes self-defending because the price of Bitcoin imposes a cost upon people who want to attack the network. Right. So as long as there's a cost, then, Bitcoin sort of defends itself. You don't really need this sort of artificial limit on block size. And so that was always Satoshi's intention. And going back to Segwit, this was the argument, right? So the argument was that, well, let's just go back to the way Satoshi intended because we were already approaching the 1 megabyte, right, limit. Enough people were using Bitcoin that it looked like the block size would need to be increased. Otherwise, people would start having to pay more and more expensive fees. And that was a worry. So basically, the entire Bitcoin developer or technical world split into two camps. One camp that says, let's just go back to what Satoshi intended, versus the other camp that says, well, this is already working. Let's not mess with it because we're afraid that if we mess with it, it's all going to fall apart. Right, the whole like Bitcoin is eggshells kind of. You can't damage Bitcoin because Bitcoin is very delicate. Right, we have to preserve this beautiful, wonderful gem of a thing because any sort of attempt at changing it could destroy it. So very high level, there's the people who believe Bitcoin is anti-fragile, right? Like me, because I come from Wall Street or technology, and I understand that things in the real world must be anti-fragile, otherwise they just never work. They will never work in the long run. Versus the people who are like, this is our little project. It's a beautiful thing. We don't want it to be tainted and polluted by the real world. Let's keep it pristine. So that was at least ostensibly their arguments. Now, in later years, we'd find out there was probably a lot more sinister money involved, and some ulterior motives funded by other parties, which might have been driving their motive. But at least at the time in 2014, 15, 16, that was their argument. So okay, I mean, it sounds like just a difference in opinion. And so Segwit came along because everybody wanted the block sizes bigger. But the core developers said it's too dangerous, and they were just sort of hemming and hawing on, like, just sort of delaying doing anything about it, always coming up with some reason why they couldn't do it. Oh, the miners will never all agree. We need them all to agree. Do we really need them all to agree? Well, we need at least 99% of them to agree. Otherwise, hard fork. Is hard forks so bad? Oh, hard forks are bad. Well, how do we know? Well, because they will be bad. So it was always a circular argument. And so Segwit was like, okay, well, why don't we do this? It's like we want Segwit because they wanted to, once again, ostensibly solve a problem with transaction malleability. And I'll have to explain that later when it comes to it. But let's just, for now, they needed to solve this thing, which they called, transaction malleability, which was a problem for them. Nobody really knew why at the time. Well, now we know, because it's essential for them to build Lightning networks. Lightning networks is impossible without this problem being solved. And so they had the ulterior motive where they wanted to build a second layer of something where they could charge people, or they could just be the masters of the system, because they're the ones who made, the second layer, which allowed, instant payments to be possible in Bitcoin. Well, if instant payments were possible in Bitcoin to begin with, then their whole platform is kind of useless, right? So they have to make it not possible. So one of the things making it not possible is a block size limit. So with a block size limit, fees will increase, thereby people will stop using it, unless there was some other second layer thing where they could avoid fees. Great. Even better that it's produced by one company and group of people, there's all a cabal, all in bed with each other. So Segwit was claimed as a block size increase, or as something, okay, here, big blockers, you got something. You can have one, it's not 2 megabytes, it's like 1.4, 1 to 1.7, depending on this and that. Even when the miners, at that point, the miners are all sort of mostly Chinese miners, so given the language barrier and stuff, a lot of them were just confused. All these Western developers arguing over stuff. Please don't mess with our income stream, because we just invested hundreds of millions of dollars. Just tell me what to do, because I don't want the money to stop. So even despite all of those, them not understanding, eventually they all agreed that, look, 8 megabytes is probably okay. 4 is okay. 2 is definitely okay. Can we at least get 2, right? And then the core developer said, nah, well, how about Segwit? It's like 1.4, 1.7. It's almost 2, right? But you know what? What we'll do is this. If all you miners agree to activate Segwit, then we'll give you 2, right? Later. We just need Segwit first. Why? Once again, I don't remember. I don't think they ever explained why. It was probably just, oh, I remember. I remember, because I remember criticizing them for this. I was going, well, isn't 2 megabytes simpler a change? Because Segwit was a kind of a big change, right? A lot of code needs to be changed, a lot of tests, a lot of things that could go wrong. It's changing the protocol. Whereas 2 megabytes is literally flip a switch that says, that checks 1 megabyte, make it 2. Right. I mean, and their response, and I say their, but I think it was actually Peter Whaley or Stipa or one of those. Actually, that's the same guy. One of their responses was, well, we've already been programming Segwit for the last 6 months and testing it. So let's just do this first. Because if we were to stop this and drop this now, and then test for a 2 megabyte change, it would just be delayed. I was like, wow, you guys are really incompetent developers, or, well, whatever, man, who cares? Fine. So So that was their pitch, and that was what came to be known as the that was the Hong Kong agreement. No. Sorry. That's the New York agreement. The New York agreement. Now I may be getting which one happened first. The one that one of them happened first. I think it was the New York agreement. The New York agreement was like, okay, activate Segwit, and then we'll give you 2 MB in November. And this was Segwit was scheduled to be activated like August or something like that. And then we'll take after it's activated, we'll take the next 3 months and we'll do the 2 MB change. We'll test it and we'll release it. The other agreement, Hong Kong agreement, and once again, my disclaimer, I could have those switched around, so don't, you can look it up on Google. The second brain for everybody. The other agreement was after Segwit was activated, then they had a secret agreement where they basically said, look, whatever you do, promise. Okay, so the core developers got all the big miners in China, had a private conference and said, okay, I want you guys to agree one thing, right? And if you don't agree this, then we're going to stop supporting you. You're going to agree that no matter what happens, you will only run our software. You're not going to run an alternative node software. Because at the time, there was already some developer groups that says like, well, screw this. If these core developers are so up in their own behinds that they think they're the gods of the world because they're the ones who are maintaining the old core node software, then we'll write our own. So there was a couple of one. I mean, Gavin Andreessen and Mike Hearn did Bitcoin XT, the first one, and then there was Bitcoin Classic and Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin ABC. Well, anyway, so other people made other node implementations. The agreement, and I think it was the Hong Kong one, said like, look, you guys promise, you sign here that says, oh, I remember they got the exchanges in on it to sort of like to strong arm them. They got Coinbase and they got like whatever the other exchange like Bitstamp and all the exchanges, all the CEOs to sign. We will only support the software coming from Blockstream or the Bitcoin core developers only. And then once they got all the exchanges assigned, they got all the miners assigned. Like, do you need the exchanges, right? So if you don't want the exchanges, well, then, bugger off and you're on your own. Good luck selling your coins because you're going to cause a fork and we're not going to be on you. You're not going to be on our side of the fork. And all these exchanges are on our side already. So this started the policy of basically lobbying the exchanges, because the exchanges is where, at least it's thought, a lot of the miners were selling their coins for to cover their costs of mining. And so they strong-armed the miners to basically agree that they will never use any other Bitcoin software but the ones coming from BTC Core. And after they signed that, then this was like obviously not even a surprise to many of us because it was so obvious incoming. After they signed that, guess what happened in November? They didn't do the 2 MB. They just said like, you know what? We don't need it anyway. Yeah. And then the miners couldn't complain. They signed it. They all signed. And they used the fact that all the miners kind of signed. And if you wanted to say, screw that, I'm going back on this, I'm going to run this other software, you wouldn't really know whether the other miners would do the same and you'd be the only one leaving. And it was a Byzantine general's problem, right? So, you don't want to be the one because you've already all signed. It's easier for everybody to just agree. Because if one guy defects, right, you say, guys, let's all get together. Let's all defect and then see what happens when they have no miners anymore. You can come to that agreement, but if one guy, says they'll leave, but then doesn't leave, then that guy will be earning all the rewards. And everybody who leaves will be forked off into a new chain with coins that they can't sell in the exchange. So it was a really, really underhanded, evil, sinister, totally obvious tactic that they pulled, to the point where there should be more articles written about the underhandedness of BTC devs, namely, all of the folks at Blockstream and Adam Back and all those, Samson Mao, he's the Goebbels. Was it Goebbels? Yeah, Goebbels, the propaganda minister of their fascist regime. So they all played the miners to get what they wanted, and that was Segwit. And so now we know why Segwit was there, because like subsequently a year later, or maybe half a year later, they said, oh, well, Segwit also helps Lightning. And then you look into it, it's like, no, actually, Lightning can't work without Segwit. It's impossible. Like, you needed to break the protocol so that you can build this sort of Frankenstein second layer thing called Lightning, which, maybe it'll work for you, but I don't know. Is it still Bitcoin? Anyway. So, sorry, very long answer.
No. It was perfect. I love it. So when you talk about the cabal, let's go into that for a second. We know that Satoshi handed the keys to Gavin and Drayson. How did we get to Blockstream? How do we have Blockstream? Um, you know, there's a lot of confusion, especially with BTC maxis, when, for instance, I throw out the fact that BTC isn't as decentralized as people think it is. And when they say, oh, well, that's not true, I'm like, well, 8% of the nodes control the majority of the hashing power on the network. Can we get into that a little bit? Explain why it's not as decentralized as everyone seems to think. Let's talk about this cabal. Let's talk about Blockstream. Let's run into that a little bit. Just
Okay.
take it and run with it.
So what was the first question about the cabal? Uh, what was the question about the cabal? Just about it?
Who are in the cabal and what is it?
Oh, oh right. Yeah. How did the keys move? Okay. So originally Satoshi gave the keys to Gavin, and then Gavin, because I guess he didn't really wasn't up to doing all the work himself, added some other people to help him, right? Like Vlad von der Laan was one, and I think Greg Maxwell was one of like within the first five people to also join. Well, Mike Hearn, of course. Mike Hearn was number three, I think. So and so Maxwell and his like that group of people who were with Maxwell, like Peter Whaley, right? So the other co-founder of Blockstream, and Adam. I don't know if Adam Back was ever a maintainer. Maybe he is, but I don't really think he writes code. He's just he's just the professor in a beard who
The guy.
spokesperson guy. And they bumped off Gavin. Well, Mike Hearn left, right, because he got so frustrated that Bitcoin was never going to scale. And he's right? I mean, like Bitcoin, BTC has never scaled. They decided to like write a totally new system called Lightning on top of it, which Mike was probably not interested in. And there was really just Gavin left, who was the original group with Satoshi, right? And Gavin was revoked of his powers when I believe this is like sometime in 2015 when he sided with Craig and he said like, I've talked with him and I think he's Satoshi or something like that. And after he published that post, that public post, the other core maintainers, the code maintainers of the Bitcoin software, who he like in the past gave permission to, basically took away all his permissions and kicked him out. So you've been corrupted. You've obviously been hacked. So we're going to take away your keys, so you can't destroy the project. That's right. I remember how much they trumped up the fact that Gavin is probably some sort of like government spy. Because did you hear that Gavin went to talk with the NSA, or was it the CIA or something like that? The CIA called him and they had a chat. And that was completely the narrative that was spun from all of the troll channels, right? From 4chan to like Twitter and everything. Like Gavin's probably government spy. It's okay that we just kick him out. So it was that therein started the whole it's us versus every normal semblance of regular society, right? Because as long as you seem to have done anything with the government, you must be a government spy. So that was how the last of the regular developers got booted out, and then from then on it was pretty much just Blockstream, right? The original developers who took over eventually formed Blockstream, the company, in 2014. Greg Maxwell, Adam Back, Peter Whaley. I don't know if Peter Todd was ever, but he was affiliated with them. Some other guys I don't remember now who are not that important in the real world, and they basically made that company. And here's one thing that if you do in research, right, and also if you're looking at anything that happens in the real world, you always have to look at incentives, right? That's the one thing I learned from Goldman, from Wall Street and everything. Just look at incentives. Usually there's a monetary incentive. Not usually, most of the time, right? There's some incentive: power, reputation, money, right? So what was their incentive? What was the incentive of these developers to act so, I don't know, antisocial to poor old Gavin, right? And it's obvious if you just looked at what Greg Maxwell was saying leading up until this point, right? When Greg Maxwell was still like, everybody was still happy family and Gavin was still in it. Greg published a paper called like I'm trying to remember, something like multi signature, gosh, it's really slipping my mind. But he published a paper which effectively was side chains, right? I read that paper, and basically that paper explained how you needed side chains in order to basically make Bitcoin secure, right? And that paper wasn't really necessary if Bitcoin worked, if Bitcoin scaled. Okay. So it was very obvious then that you would take that and then create a company, which that's probably what he went to his backers. He went to his their investors of Blockstream and said, look, we can make Bitcoin scale. Check out this thing called sidechains. And with sidechains, now then we can get to global scale. So, give us money. And so Blockstream was formed on the premise of building sidechains on Bitcoin, right? And sidechains was built from the misunderstanding of Greg Maxwell of how Bitcoin actually were to scale. And so, I guess if you reel it all the way back or rewind it all the way back, the only thing he's guilty of was not understanding how Bitcoin really worked. That was most people, really, including me, most people.
Including
until Craig
Vitalik.
Wright yeah. Definitely even Vitalik. Greg Maxwell probably understood more than Vitalik did. I will give him at least that credit. But both of them came up with weird solutions to something that wasn't really a problem, right? It wasn't until Craig started explaining things that, all of a sudden these things started clicking. It's like, all right, I never considered that. I'm like, no, I always thought that was not possible. And then when you start thinking about it like rationally, without this bias of having everybody say that it's not possible, and then you just believing it's not possible, that it started making sense. So sidechains was the reason why Blockstream was formed, and therefore they started building upon that. And that was actually their first product, like Elements or something like that. They built their own sidechain called like Elements, which you could do. They explored with all sorts of new features like confidential transaction mixing technology and all the stuff that they didn't want to release in the mainnet. And they wanted, obviously, I think they were saying that, we'll just play it with it here, and if it's useful enough, we'll release it in the mainnet. But obviously they were just like, hey, we'll just do it here, but if you really want to use it, why don't you come into our sidechain, right? Because they would control the exchange rate from Bitcoin to sidechain coin. So they really just wanted to say, like, we're going to do all these cool features, and why don't you just use our sidechain, and then obviously pay us in exchange rate for it. So that's kind of like that was the motive, right? And that when that motive didn't play out because nobody really thought the things that they are adding was that useful. Like, surprise, surprise, how many people use confidential transactions except for criminals?
Yeah.
I don't know, a couple of enthusiasts who just trying it out. And if you really wanted to do criminal stuff, Monero came around. So like, hey, why don't you use Monero? Why bother going through a side chain just to do that on Bitcoin? I'll just buy Monero. So they kind of like, okay, well, this business didn't pan out. What can we do next? Well, what's something else that doesn't work on Bitcoin yet? Oh, instant transactions. Oh, well, if only we had some technology that could solve that. And they, lo and behold, some guy came up with another 59-page white paper. Two guys, actually. Joseph Poon and Thaddeus Dryja. Thaddeus is actually quite a smart fellow, but Joseph, well, let's just say Thaddeus is a smart fellow. And that paper was like 59 pages of like, why do you need to do this? Yeah, it was just the most roundabout way. It was something that yeah, I guess it could work, but oh my God, is it like complicated, and it overlooked some of the most basic economic factors. Like, you're assuming that everybody, like, the only way this is really going to work as optimally as it can, as optimally as a working Bitcoin, right? Like a working proper Bitcoin network would be like here, and Lightning, in the beginning would be like under the floor, and for it to even approach the capabilities of Bitcoin, it would need everybody on planet or everybody in Lightning to put all of their life savings into Lightning Network. Like, just buy Bitcoins and then lock them all into channels. And not only, you couldn't just like blindly dump them into one channel. Like, if I just took all my savings and opened a channel with you, Bridget, right? That wouldn't work. because it wouldn't be optimal. It would have to somehow dynamically adjust so that I would have just the right amounts of channel capacity with everybody I interact with on a daily basis. And then the one day which I needed to interact with some new party which I never interacted with before, I'm just going to have to do a regular Bitcoin transaction and pay the high fee. That sounds like a great idea. And I'm being sarcastic. So
Yeah.
that was like, how, okay, I guess theoretically it could work. And I was thinking that, but I can see so many problems with it. That problem, that economic problem, also the problem if everybody's going to lock up all their money into these like accounts, which can be can which is balances can change without them paying anybody because other people can pay through you. It feels like a bank account, but worse, right? It feels like me opening a regular bank account, except somebody else's coffee payment will deplete my balance with this bank account, but increase my balance with an old bank account that I have somewhere else in the world. Okay. And I'm not getting paid interest for this. Like, have you totally ignored the time value of money? I mean, just on that alone, nobody's going to put all of their life savings in this thing because we want interest if you're going to lock up your money for any amount of time. And the amount of time you lock up your money for is 2 weeks. Right. And then I said that and they say, oh, but you can change that. That's only the default. But, 2 weeks is probably safe because, given the fact that the Bitcoin main chain could have like forks or some reorgs and all this kind of stuff, you want to wait at least 2 weeks so that, the revoking, the penalty transaction will happen and everything will sort itself out 2 weeks. I was going, okay. So we went from a system which takes 10 minutes to do all this, 10 minutes to 2 weeks. The only upside is that you only have to go through this pain if it's a adversarial close. So you kind of have to trust the people you open channels with. Okay, so we went from a trustless system that takes 10 minutes to sort itself out for consensus to a trustful system which takes 2 weeks to sort itself out. Bravo! This is innovation. And I was like, what are you guys talking about? This is like, it might work, but it's just such a pet project for like, I don't know. So, and then when Backstream, Adam Backstream, when Blockstream threw their weight behind this silly, college project of an idea, it was so obvious then. It was like, okay, so this is your new play for trying to be profitable for your shareholders. Okay, I get it. Bravo to you. I mean, I'm capitalist after all. Good on you. Try to do it, but for the rest of us, you're kind of doing the anti-libertarian thing by impeding our freedom to innovate by deliberately handicapping Bitcoin such that this idiotic idea of yours can actually have any chance of being successful. And so that would be where the story would have ended. And this is probably around 2016. If it wasn't for the fact, and this is where it all went squirrely, and I'll end with this. Well, I'll end and you can ask the next question. It all went pear-shaped what happened in 2017? You have a guess?
Wasn't it the Segwit, the whole debacle? I'm fuzzy on 16, 17. That's like right around the time I got into it.
No, Segwit was the debacle in 2017 and the whole that caused the fork. But the thing which made their totally silly argument, which I did not think anybody with a sane head on their shoulders would agree with and it would see through completely, right? But what made it such that the actual world kind of eventually fell behind their crazy ideology? 2017. Tether. Tether started the printing presses. You can just see the amount of Tether that was outstanding in before 2017. It was really just using the Omni network, it was used to be called Mastercoin back in the good old days, and that was terrible because Bitcoin was handicapped. Bitcoin was terrible, right? And evidenced by that, Tether couldn't really do their money printing machine. So, but maybe for other reasons, for also like legal reasons and all this kind of stuff. But everything sort of fell into place in 2017, and Tether found their new banking partner. Their bank got canceled, like their Taiwanese bank basically kicked them out, and they found some like shady bank in Puerto Rico or something like that to take their money or to launder their money, and and they started printing like crazy. And what happened was when they started printing like crazy, they used their own exchanges like Bitfinex and iFinex, their group of exchanges, to sort of peddle bitcoins, buy up Bitcoin price. By buying up Bitcoin price, it shot the price. I mean, 2017. What was the price before 2017? It was like what, $5,000? Less.
Less than that. I mean, I think it was only $3,000 in July of 2017.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So at $3,000, okay, people are paying attention to Bitcoin, and this is pre-fork, right?
Mm.
But once it shot up to like 12,000, and then everybody went crazy. And then it's not just the mentality change of the people who are just buying in. It was more importantly, the people who were in the cabal became overnight rich. Like as if they weren't already rich. I mean, if they got in at $20 or $200 at 3,000, they already have a couple million, maybe some tens of millions, right? But now it went up to 10,000. So now all of a sudden, on paper, you have like hundreds of millions. Well, what can you do with hundreds of millions of dollars on paper? I don't know. You know, you don't have to be a genius, but I can think of some interesting things you can do with this on paper. Though it's not cold hard cash in a bank account, but with hundreds of millions of dollars in Bitcoin on paper, you can start hiring developers, hiring marketing people, writing commercial paper, writing debt. You can do all sorts of things. You can start influencing people, influencing mayors of cities, influencing all politicians, because people just see the dollar value. I mean, and this is something I know for a fact by being in Wall Street for 14 years. People see dollar value. They don't appreciate the difference between dollar value in a bank versus dollar value in a derivative portfolio, right? Or dollar value in a stock portfolio. Mark to market value equals bank account to most regular lay people. Unfortunately, they just don't understand the complexities of financial world. So people see this huge amount of money. This guy must be rich. I'm totally buying whatever he's selling me. Pass me that Kool-Aid, because whatever you're doing something right. But they didn't. All they did was they just relied their friends printing money in Puerto Rico or whatever like that and bumping up the price. And to if you look back, it's actually kind of like in a sick way, a beautiful thing, right? They have this perfect. They're trying to invent a perpetual motion machine. And I've said this to some people who are actually who were smart enough to know this, but they said, you know what? By the time the authorities catch on, we'll already have exited. So are we doing something illegal? Well, it's not illegal yet, so technically we're not. We're just doing something gray. We're doing something which, on ethic probably will be illegal, but not illegal yet. So as long as you don't get caught, it's the bear principle. You know the bear principle? When you're running away from the bear, you don't have to run that fast. You just have to run faster than the slowest guy. So they're just basically saying like, look, as long as we're not the ones who are going to be first nailed to the wall, screw it, but whatever. Hey, this is how we're going to make ourselves millions. And they're right. It's immoral. I wouldn't want to earn my millions that way, but some people don't have the same ethics as others, I suppose. So they just are doing it, and they'll continue to do it, because as long as they can print money, they can float the price of BTC, make a lot of paper wealth, which fuels a lot of marketing and a lot of support and a lot of PR firms and everything, which then causes the whole market to actually just start swinging their way, which actually then in their minds is a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? They have to bootstrap it. They fake all this wealth to bring everybody in, to really put their hard-earned US dollars into the system, and all of a sudden it balances out. Now I didn't steal money. I mean, it's not that I printed money. I just kind of forwarded myself some future dollars. It's kind of like taxes in a way. Well, reverse taxes, the inverse tax, right? It's like, I'm going to just take some money from the future, and then I'll just make people coming in after me to pay for it. And if everybody it could all balance out in the end, and we're all happy, right? And so that's why this crazy, nonsensical ideology has lasted that long, longer than I thought, because a logical person, as I thought back in 2015, 16, is like, this won't last very long, because this is clearly insane, right? Clearly makes no sense. It's not going to work, but
Here it
perpetual
is.
motion. Here it is.
Here it is. And now we have Brock Pierce and commercial papers and pumping liquidity into BTC still. And
It's a liquidity game now, right? BTC is no longer a technical project at all. It's a financial. Not a financial, but it's a mind game mentality.
it's
It's
digital gold, don't you know, Jerry? Gosh.
Yeah, exactly. Well, see, they're admitting it. It's a mindset change, right? It's like you just have to think about a world where we're using digital gold and not real money anymore. And I think to myself, like, real money never hurt me in any way. I mean, like, what did real money? I mean, I can kind of see, theoretically there are some negative things, but it really is. We grew up in an age of paper money, right? We did. I mean, since 1971. Is our lives okay today compared to someone who lived in the late 60s? I think it's probably better. I mean, we
Probably
have
better.
iPhones and stuff, right? So all of this was made possible by the current system. Why do you have so much malice towards the current system? Is it because you're not doing so well in it as others may be? Maybe because you're not producing as much as others may be. I don't know. So it really just goes back to, unfortunately, always goes back to politics. The people who are not doing well in the system will always seek to change it, as opposed to just working harder within it. And that will always be the case. I don't fault them for it. I mean, it's always like communism and that grain where we just have to overthrow the system because it doesn't seem to be working for us, is always the first go-to, mentality of the downtrodden. Never
Yeah.
to, maybe I should just work harder. I mean, at least in Western society. I think some others, cultures do take the "I'll just work harder" thing more to heart, and you can see that in their culture. But generally in the West, it's almost like I deserve better, so therefore, if it's not working, something's wrong with the system.
There's a sense of entitlement here in the Western world, whereas that entitlement seems to be sort of non-existent in, say, like Japanese culture, for instance, right? Uh, Japanese will just get up and go to work like, oh, all right, I need to work harder. Western people are just so entitled. They're like, yeah, it's broken. Fix it for me because I'm special. And so yeah, I get that. So we talked about the cabal. I want to talk about how BTC isn't actually decentralized, right? Can we get into
Oh
that
yeah,
real
yeah,
quick?
yeah. So, oh gosh, the decentralization myth. I've written a lot about this. I'll try to keep this under 5 minutes. Um, so decentralization is one of the catchwords that the cabal uses as part of the brainwashing campaign. It's very much, once again, like communism. Sorry, I have to draw a lot of parallelisms with communism because you just kind of see the same game played over, just in a different era with the different players, right? But it's the same chess game. It's like, here is the thing that we're selling you that will definitely make the world better, right? Don't try to think too hard about how or why. It's you're not smart enough to figure it out. Don't worry, I am. We are. And we figured it out for you already. Like, I might as well be Stalin or Lenin or anybody who are all these leaders who are very charismatic, Fidel Castro or whatever. And we just tell you that this is going to be better. Trust us. Decentralization is that magic phrase because it's important to note how many times has the word decentralization showed up on the white paper. You've read it, right? Or I don't know, maybe it
It's
wasn't.
not on there.
Exactly. Exactly. That's something that how could these people be pushing this narrative when it's so blatantly obvious it was nothing to do with what Satoshi was talking about ever. But it was very convenient because and this was something that came out of the fact that, remember, their incentives of why they needed to limit blocked Bitcoin. It was just purely capitalistic, greedy, monopolistic incentives, right?
There's
Okay.
financial
So I
incentives.
don't blame them for that. But
Yeah.
usually competition is the thing that keeps monopolies in checks and balance in a capitalist system, a free capitalist system. And they wanted to block off competition by just basically making it so that it doesn't work. So you have to
Mm.
fix it now. You have to all compete to see who can fix it better. So because they limited the block size, and that means that precludes all of the miners being the sort of the the stalwarts, the foundation of the future Bitcoin ecosystem, because now the miners will only be hatching. They'll, you know, well, they won't be able to earn as much profit as the transactions are being produced. So the transactions will just build up in the network, and they have a limited ability to be able to, deal with this pile up, this queue, right? So so therefore they no longer have any incentives for getting better. We've just arrived at communism, right? All these miners like, yeah, why should I buy more bandwidth? It's only 1 megabyte. If I bought more, I'm just wasting more money, right? But if you didn't have that limit, then a miner might say, wow, look at all this queue building up. If I upgraded all my systems, if I bought faster internet, if I bought a node in Iceland or somewhere closer to where all these transactions are being generated, I'm going to be the one mining these transactions and earning their fees. Hey, capitalism. I earn more money if I do more, right? If I'm more efficient. But they removed that. So after removing that, what was the only thing that you could sell the people on, especially the people who you just really want to brainwash? Do your part, run your node. And so the decentralization thing was like, everybody needs to run their own validating node, and that matters. That's the lie. It doesn't matter. But they started the whole narrative that it really matters for reasons which really don't make sense, which is the reason why I thought people would see through this, but I sort of overestimated the gullibility of people who aren't technical. And these nodes that are running everywhere, what was the thing? Right. This allowed them to change the narrative to anti-government, right? Bitcoin is about not letting the government steal your stuff, right? The government always wants to steal your stuff. If you're not looking, the government is going to bust down your door, right?
Take all your stuff.
Yeah, all your stuff. If they could do it, they would.
And you need to be able to run your own node to verify everything.
Yes.
That's an important thing that they say.
Totally important. So there's like two completely facetious statements which don't make sense even on their own. One, if the government really wanted to steal your stuff all the time, they have a monopoly on violence. I mean, they would just do it tomorrow, right? Okay, they don't. So clearly they don't want to steal your stuff all the time. Maybe some of them actually want to have a working society. I'm not saying that corruption doesn't exist, but I'm going to say that more likely than not, that more of the government is kind of like generally good people, right? Right. Except for the ATO, of course. Haha. The people at the Australian Tax Authority. Okay, no, jokes aside. The second statement, which is completely false, was like running your own node would even make any difference whatsoever. Because, and this is the point which none of them have any real response to. So if you want to challenge one of them to the point where they're just speechless and just come up with some sort of meaningless gobbledygook as a response, it's this one. How does validating everyone else's transactions make it so that the government can't stop Bitcoin? Oh, it's because if the government shut down they won't be able to shut down all the nodes. Okay, but they still shut down all your miners. Then what are you going to do? Oh, well, we'll just all start mining with our Raspberry Pis. Okay, so did you do the math? Because this is where they just go speechless. Because if you just do the math, which none of them seem to do, is like, look at the hash rate, look at the difficulty. If the miners all disappeared and you all mined at a Raspberry Pi's hash rate, even if you had 1 million of them, 10 million of them, you would be like 1,000 times like less hash rate than the mining network right now. And 1,000 times, like, what is 10 minutes times 1,000? Okay, you can do that math. That's like 10,000 minutes. And how long does it take for the difficulty to adjust? 2016 blocks. Most of them will say 2 weeks. You should say wrong, not 2 weeks. 2016 blocks. 2 weeks, assuming 10 minutes. 2016 blocks at 10,000 minutes, a little bit longer than 2 weeks. Works out to be maybe about 4 or 6 months. Okay, so you're going to be basically dealing with no transactions for 4 to 6 months. So tell me again how the government failed to take down Bitcoin by you running that node. And generally, that's when they think, well, but it'll eventually come back, and we'll come out of our bunkers after 6 months, and we'll still have our money. Okay, I guess. but you won't be able to buy anything with it. I mean, it would just not work as money anymore. So I don't know how devoted you must be. Like even all the farmers in your little commune there, I don't care how much they love Bitcoin. I think they love food more and farming and doing whatever they normally do in their regular lives, to the point where it's like, screw this thing, I'm just gonna use, I don't know, I got lumps of metal here, why don't we trade with this? Or maybe we'll just go back to this paper thing with Benjamin Franklin on it. That worked fine. That's what's going to happen. So once again, they live in this bubble where the real world doesn't exist, and they're trying to like develop a moon or Mars colony sort of ecosystem where, you know, they want to be completely self-sufficient. And that's wonderful. Hey, I mean, that's wonderful as a sociological experiment, but it's not realistic.
Right. Well, going more into that just for a second, that's it feels like you're touching on some comments you made on Twitter, talking about don't think for a moment that the corrupt governments and officials are already using BTC to strengthen their power structures. If you help
Yeah.
criminals, you help corrupt governments. Accountability is the only defense and weapon. Anonymity is the enemy of freedom and civil society. You want to elaborate on that just a little bit
Oh,
more?
yes. Yes, thank you. This is if there's one message I want people to really take home, right? It's not a technical message. It's a very simple, ethical, right? Plutonic, or not Plutonic. Yeah, Plato. Anyway, the simple message is that you have to, we live in a day and age where truth can be twisted. Truth is defined by what you watch on YouTube and you read on Twitter. And it is a truly wonderful thing. I don't want to be branded like an anti, free speech person. The internet has brought about the explosion of ideas and content anybody can publish. But with it, just like with any weapon, with any new technology, there's a dark side. The dark side of this new technology, because the internet is not all roses and daisies, it's not all great stuff. The negative thing that the internet has brought, or at least specifically, is social media. Social media has some good points, but in my perspective, I'm a father now, I think it's mostly negative, especially if you have kids. But social media has allowed, or the ability to publish without any sort of checks and balances, without any sort of repercussions on false publications. Like nobody's held accountable for things that they may state is wrong. Now, as bad as the press, you can say that the press can be manipulated and paid off and whatever. They were an institution. And there were honorable people in working in the press, just like there are honorable people as lawyers and doctors and accountants. You have to trust that these people generally are honorable and good, honest people. Otherwise, you just can't operate in our society, right? Anybody can kill you. Your doctor could kill you, easily kill you. Your barber could kill you, right? The only thing that keeps him from, like a psychotic person, a psychotic barber, from just killing you is the fact that he's probably going to die himself or go to jail or something. But he can easily slit everybody's throat in the barber shop. And if that was his one goal, what's to stop? Go on. Oh, and we're back. Yeah. So so not to beleaguer the point anymore, given that there's a lot of versions of truth, we as people, we as a society need to really, really be critical about every piece of news and media and articles, pieces that you consume. You have to be really critical. And the most dangerous idea of all of these, and I know it's enticing, just as communism was enticing to me when I was a teenager and entering university. It is for everybody because it's so ideally, the utopia, right? The most dangerous idea is the idea that we can operate as a society without laws, right? Libertarianism is great. I'm very libertarian leaning, but there's the extreme end when you cease to be a libertarian and you're an anarchist. And no matter how many good-hearted, with good intention anarchists you find, they all do not understand the dangers that they're playing with, unless they actually want the world to burn, in which case I guess they're following their calling in life, in which case good on them, but they'll probably burn in hell. The world must operate with laws. And so going back to that statement, right, if you remove the penalties for doing bad things, you have to come to the conclusion that more bad things will be done, obviously, right? Imagine there was no penalty for murder. Do you think there'll be more murders or less? Duh, right? Duh. I mean, it's not even worth asking. Now then, how do you propose that we run a society in a way that would not increase the number of murders, but get rid of all the laws or get rid of government? Because at the end of the day, anarchists usually say, I'm against government, but I'm not against laws. But they don't understand that that doesn't make any sense. Because at the end of the day, if you get rid of government and you have, I don't know, a free market of enforcement mercenaries who do policing, and you have a free market of judges and lawyers who will try things, and I don't know how you're going to get disputes to be agreed upon which arbiter you're going to use and all this kind. Okay, if you even construct this crazy Rube machine, reminds me of lightning, by the way, if you create this crazy Rube Goldberg machine for doing something as simple as pouring a glass of water, but okay, if you construct all of this and if it even worked, how it works for a short period of time. Probably the longest, I don't know, any anarchistic society has worked is probably a year or two. Because what will happen is that in the absence of the declared rulers, right? Rulers who, God bless, democracy, we can change our rulers. At least there are rules for us to change our rulers. We don't live in North Korea. But if there is no rulers and you think the free market can sort of balance it all out, these are the same people who think that monopolies are bad. Okay, if monopolies are bad, what keeps monopolies from happening? Oh, competition. Okay, if it's competition, what do companies do? They go for profit. Okay, so if your government and your law enforcement officers were all for profit, do you think they would be just in enforcing laws, or do you think they would just enforce the laws to the person who pays them the most? They're for profit. You just said. So of course, if you think you have corrupt government officials now, lo and behold, you think they're going to be less corrupt when basically they're all for-profit agencies, for-profit judges, for-profit police force? We already have for-profit police forces. They're called the mafia, right? They're a for-profit police force, right? The mob. We have for-profit government officials. They're called the corrupt ones. So in the perfect anarchistic society where they have some utopia where they have no government, it will be a very short period of time until the biggest mafia gun-running gang of mercenaries will just declare themselves the new rulers. They'll say, like, you know what, we're the dictators now, we're king. All these other guys, we're just gonna kill them all. It's gonna be a big gang war of like enforcers where they just kill all the other guys with guns. Now we're the only ones with guns. Now we're going back to, the democracy thing, don't like that. We're going to go back to autocracy. I'm the new Kim Jong-un of New York. That's what's going to happen, anarchists. That literally is going to happen because it's happened in Cambodia. It's happened in North Korea. It's happened in China. Happened in Soviet Union. Happened in Eastern Europe. Happened in South America. Happened in Cuba. It happened in so many places. Why do you think you, in your brilliant ivory tower of academic hired learning, with university education, think that you figured out something that the world hasn't seemed to figure out for the last 200 years? I don't know. I really don't know. And maybe it's just hubris. Like, maybe it'll be different this time because we know we shouldn't be bad like Kim Jong-un. Okay, you may think that, but the next person who takes over from you with the guns might just think, you know what? I think Kim Jong-un's life is pretty sweet. I think I'm going to do that, right? And what are you going to do now? So it's just so sad that people buy into anarchism. So please, please, please respect the law. If you don't like the laws, sure, there are bad laws. Change them in the ways that we have created a legal system for you to change them. If you don't care enough to change them, well, then you don't care. You do not have a voice. Shut up. Right? If you care enough to change them, please change them. Be a politician. Be one of the honest ones. Be a lobbyist. Be a lawyer. Right? Do something that actually makes the system better, as opposed to just saying this system's all broken. Let's just throw away the whole system and let's go with the free market for guns. Nothing wrong with owning guns, by the way. I'm just saying the free market for enforcing laws, and I don't even know how they're going to agree with one body of law, right? Oh, no, it's common law. No, I'm going to use Philippine law. I'm going to use, like, Laos law. Laos law says I can just shoot a person, an adulterer on the spot. Okay, well, but he's American. Boom, too late. What are you gonna do about it? Anyway, I digress. So yeah, respect the system. We have a society for the last 2000. I mean, modern democratic society for only maybe 200 years. 200 years. Human society has run through feudalism and autocracies and monarchies and for like 5,000 years, right? And so we know how that system works. We generally all agree that we don't like it. So give democracy a chance. And just because it may be broken in your part of the world doesn't mean the whole thing is broken. Just may mean, you know, needs to be tweaked.
So how is the government involved with BTC then? Because I believe
Oh,
that was part of the whole spiel there.
thank you. Thank you. Yeah. I diverged because I talked about this thing I'm really heated about. The thing about BTC is that if you, for instance, you're trying to, the claim is anonymity, right? Because one of the things about anarchists are like, look, the government has no right, nobody has a right to see what I do with my money. So this is kind of like very appealing, of course. Like who doesn't want that, right? But as a society, we all have collectively agreed that murder is bad. Agreed? We also kind of collectively agreed that, child pornography is bad, right? We also agree that, sex slaves are bad, right? And slave trafficking is bad. And all of these things we kind of, 99.9% of society agrees with this. So if, how do you propose that we enforce that these things are not done if you allow everybody to transact in a way which you can't trace what happened after the fact? Now, I'm not saying that what you do should be traced immediately. That would be an invasion of privacy, right? But if you, Scott Weinstein, Harvey Weinstein, I apologize for Scott Weinstein, somebody from my past. If he ever reads this, watches this, the name came up because it's the same last name. Harvey Weinstein, or what's the other guy? Obviously, the guy who killed himself.
Epstein?
Epstein, yes.
Okay.
Yes. So if you're one of those, like you're a person like that who's abusing their position of power, would you as a society want to be able to prove that he actually did all those things? Or would you want, as a society, for all those records of all the times that he paid bribes to the government, or he paid, for, like underage prostitutes, or all this kind of stuff? You want
Absolutely.
all that to be impossible to find.
No.
Of course, right? Of course. Now, so this is clear. This is the other argument that any of these like so-called closet anarchists, like they're like, I have no response to. Well, because that's a completely insane thing you're asking. They're like, well, not if it means that the government can see what I'm doing. Well, the government generally, they don't care what you're doing unless you're actually caught.
Well,
And
isn't this what we're getting in the form of Taproot, basically? Is so that this can be facilitated?
It helps to hide the money trail. So it's not, I don't think it's as secure as, say, Monero's mixing, but yeah, it's all moving towards a direction where you're hiding the money trail. And this is bad because they always claim that, it's our privacy. Then they always confuse privacy from anonymity. Privacy means the government can't, without cause or reason, poke into what you're doing. But if they have cause or reason, I don't even want to say government, the law enforcement agencies of your community, right? If your local sheriff says, hey, Harvey Weinstein's been doing all this stuff with all the families around this neighborhood, I would like to appeal to a court to give me a court order that gives me the ability to check whether or not he actually paid for all of this, child trafficking, right? I want that to be possible. Not like it's the norm, but I need it to be possible. And that's the difference between anonymity and privacy. Privacy means Harvey could do all those things and nobody would notice until somebody, a dead body shows up somewhere. And then some parents are like, hey, my daughter was murdered. And like, I think this Harvey Weinstein guy did it. And then it turns out he has blood all over his apartment, blah, 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 blah. And they catch him. And then we need some evidence. And digging through this, clearly there's cause for a court order if there's like crime scene, and then in that case they can open up the records, and only in that case Because it's with just cause. We have laws that define what defines just cause. But clearly none of these anarchists are lawyers either. They just think it's all broken. So anonymity means never, right? It's impossible to ever find the records. And therefore you are enabling criminals. Full stop, right? At the end of the day, you just basically have to say this. Do you or do you not support criminals? And they'll always him and ha and shift around this one. They'll be like, well, but privacy is very important. No. Do you, yes or no, support criminals? Oh, but taxes, taxes are a crime. Paying taxes is not crime. No. I mean, child trafficking. I mean, these crimes which I've just described to you that 99.9% of the whole entire world agree is evil. Do you agree that, do you want to support those people doing those types of crimes? Yes or no? And eventually they'll say no. Well, then you need these records to be visible in certain cases. Therefore, you need privacy, not anonymity. Therefore, what are you doing, Bitcoin, right? So to end off, and this is not even, everything I've described is already a pretty grim world if this was allowed, but more grim, and this is the irony, and I'll leave you with this ironic thought and argument. To all of these people who argue that anonymity is going to protect them from the government, it is a laughable statement, because do you think if anonymity was actually possible in some of the blockchains and it was made possible in Bitcoin, do you think who's going to use this new feature of Bitcoin for evil more? You, the person who just wants to engage in some shady drug purchases every so often, or the big bad corrupt governments and drug lords and dealers and child traffickers? Which one's going to use this feature more? Not you, because you're just doing it because you have this idea that you don't like the government ever being able to see your drug purchases because you're embarrassed about them. Versus these guys, that's their business. They're drug lords. Like, this is literally their business. Of course they would use it more. Governments, they're corrupt. The corrupt governments, they would use it more. So if you are afraid of your government's corruption level now, imagine how afraid you should be if the government would never be accountable to even the legal system itself or anybody, because now you can't even prove that that FBI officer that visited your house just murdered your entire family. You'll never be able to prove it because they have the records and it's all deleted and everything is cleaned up. And okay, so now you've just given the most dangerous weapon to the organization who already has a monopoly on violence because they have all the guns, the government. Okay, that's the dumbest thing ever. So to that, I just think they're just a bunch of hypocritical people who don't think through the inevitable consequences of their ideology. Right?
Makes sense to me.
It's just going to be a horrible world.
I think you raised a lot of valid points in there, and I hadn't quite looked at it like that. Being a libertarian myself, I've heard it all. But when you put it into those parameters, I mean, it's pretty obvious that, anonymity would be just a weapon for the government to, I mean, they're going to do everything bigger and better than us. So why would you give them that weapon?
Right.
It's very interesting.
Go
ahead.
The counter to this, the counter argument, which is, this is the light part of the story. This is the happy. This is the hope, right? Just like Pandora's box. All that crap that came out of it, hope came out of it. This is the one hope I'll leave you. The opposite of anonymity is also if anonymity will produce the ultimate hell on Earth, the opposite of anonymity will eventually produce paradise on Earth. And I'll explain to you why. So this is the thing that most people, I don't think a lot of people understand. Total transparency, or the ability for privacy, but transparency, means complete historical traceability. All obviously under the right conditions, right? Not that it's visible all the time, will eventually eliminate government corruption. So if you use anonymity, you're just going to make the corrupt government more corrupt and more powerful. If you give a way for people to track everything, right, and be able to prove it later, you actually destroy corruption in the long run. This is why I'm very positive about BSV, and because it's only Bitcoin which understands that. Well, I mean, but because Craig, right? I mean, I understand it because of Craig, and a lot of the stuff he's written and a lot of stuff he says makes a hell of a lot of sense in the long run. And the reason why transparency cleans up government is because the only thing I need to happen, the only thing that I need to be the conditions in order for me to be absolutely certain, I don't know how long, but absolutely certain that this will be the end outcome of the world, like a perfectly honest and just and moral society. The only thing I'm counting on is that, and I hope you'll agree with me, generally, people, if given the option, this is like ancient Greek philosophy, right? Given the option of doing good or doing evil, more people will choose to do good. That's all I rely on. If that assumption is wrong, well, then we're all screwed. But as long as we believe that in the core of every human being, there is generally more good than evil, and certainly there are definitely people with more evil than good, right? Epstein, Weinstein's, blah blah blah. But more statistically, more people have more good in them than evil, and that's all I need. Because if that's the case, then I believe that people will use, right, this tool to hold government accountable. And how it will start is this: we always talk about corrupt governments, but or corrupt politicians, but we don't talk about all the honest ones. I'm certain there are a lot of them, but obviously, if they just ran up on the street and said like, I'm an honest politician, vote for me, I mean, then you'll be like, hey, you're not really honest, right? You just want your vote, right? It's kind of tough being an honest politician because you can't actually advertise yourself as one, right? You just have to been doing it long enough, and the people around you know that you're a good guy or good girl or woman, right? So given those honest politicians, they just need to catch on with this idea. Hey, what if I show by example, right? Like Jesus said. I'm not overly Christian, but I'm sure he said that. I did Bible studies. Show by example. You lead by example. You put all your government public records and budgets on blockchain, right? It's public. This is easy because you don't even need to encrypt them. It's public. So given that it's public records, so you don't need to worry about privacy, right? And maybe it's your mayor or maybe it's your local, I don't know, fire department, something like that. Put it on the blockchain. Let everybody see it, right? And then that builds, right? Maybe the police department starts doing that. Great. Every time someone's promoted, oh, here's the record. Or maybe they hide all the, redact all the names, but here's the budget. Here's all the money. Here's how much we spent for like jails and da-da-da and food. Here's how much we spent on the annual, the retreat to Cancun. Oh,
well, there's a financial incentive to do it as well, because if like a police department, let's say they're spending money on storage or cloud servers or whatever, you just put it on the BSV blockchain, then you have a record of it. You don't need to pay a cloud server to hold the information that you're already going to hold, or whatever. And then it's also public. There's a financial incentive as well.
It's exactly, and it gives you traceability, right? And it gives you it gives you, what's the word, if anyone ever doubts what you did with your money, you just say, hey, look, it's there. It's published, right? And so once organizations start doing this, honesty starts to, it's sort of addictive. It sort of grows, right? It's kind of like the pay forward thing. If someone does something really out of the way nice to you, you really feel the need to do that and pay it forward. And in the same way, if the police department or if the the local mayorship, they started doing this for all of, like, maybe the pensions, maybe all the government salaries and everything are published, then people will start following by example. Pretty soon you're going to have some like councilman, or what do you call it, congressman or a senator will start doing it too. And then pretty soon you're going to have, like, well, not pretty soon, but maybe some years later, you're going to have like this overwhelming number of congressmen to say, you know what, Mr. President, I think our Treasury Department should be putting everything, all its books, because we want to see where all the money's, you guys spending how much on defense and military and how much this, let's put it on. Didn't you guys spend like $50,000 on toilet upgrades, in the president's suite? I think the people should be able to see that and judge you on why you really need new toilets, that kind of stuff. And pretty soon, politicians who are campaigning on an honest platform will probably win more votes, and then you will eventually have more honest politicians in power. So it's a long process, but it's just like curing cancer. It's a long process. You can't eliminate it all at once, right? You just have to slowly kill off all the cancerous cells by, you know, I don't know, chemotherapy. I don't want to
I
really compare.
absolutely agree with you. I think it would be more or less along the lines of maybe not so much of a pay it forward type of method, but rather there would be financial incentives. And then once you get an organization or a company or whatever on board with putting things on chain for one thing, then all of a sudden the whole department would be like, okay, well, what happens if we go ahead and put these departments on there too, so we're all using the same system? And then suddenly the whole company is doing it, and that's how they're storing it. And then one company sees it, so the next company's like, oh, well, let's adopt their model because that seems to be working for them. And then that chain of events goes. And as far as politicians go, yeah, I think if a politician came out and started campaigning and saying, okay, I'm going to be putting all these records on chain for you guys to view, automatically you're going to be like, oh, okay, this guy,
Right.
this makes sense. Let's go with this
Okay.
guy. Obviously, he's not trying to screw us over if he's going to make everything transparent.
That's right. So this
So,
is, and I think this is this close for this to happen because I heard the mayor of Miami was already saying like, I'm going
yes,
to take my pay in Bitcoin. Well, I don't really care how you take your pay, but I want to see where all your pay comes from. I want to see the budget. I want to see if there's any sort of corrupt money coming up in your department. If you promise to put that in a blockchain, you got my vote, right? And that is such an easy way to win honesty and support from people because people generally want honest leaders, and the blockchain allows them to prove that they're honest, and it rewards honesty because people can show their records will definitely win against the politician who says, oh, I'm not going to show my records, they're private. No, I'm sorry. Like, okay, well, I can kind of believe you or not, right? So it kind of like disadvantages the people who want to hide stuff and rewards people who want to be transparent when it's justified. I mean, obviously, you're a public
yeah.
servant. It should be transparent, right? And for private citizens, everything should be private unless, of course, you're convicted of a crime or something, some investigation. Otherwise, you have your privacy. And I think that's the perfect system. And I think that's the perfect balance where the one system that can do it, has a scale to do it, has the ability because it's not picking sides. It's not trying to hide things. It's not, it's right there. You can encrypt it or you can put it in plain text.
It's BSV.
All of this can be done on BSV. And
Yep.
originally, it was originally Bitcoin, but really nobody thought about the widespread application of Bitcoin beyond just paying for coffee, all right? Which a lot of people just got hooked up on. And now it's not even paying for coffee because you ask BTC people, it's about digital gold, right? It's about my personal sovereignty. I'm buying Bitcoin because
I
I
think
want to
they
be
go back
sovereign.
and forth with the narratives there. One day it's about buying coffee, and the next day it's about, oh, it's digital gold, it's a store of asset, it's a deflationary thing. And it's like, you know what, Peter Todd's been out there advocating inflating the BTC coin cap and making it an inflationary asset by like 0.1 or 0.01% per year or something like that, and increasing the total supply. Like all of these things, it's just like what you were saying, there's a right way and a wrong way to do this, and BTC is doing it the wrong way, and BSV is the right way if we keep going forward the way that we are right now. Everything is possible on BSV, and that's why I'm rooting for it. I think you're right on the money there, Jerry. I think that was a very interesting concept to take in, but once you explain it in those terms, it makes perfect sense, at least to me, and hopefully the viewers as well.
Awesome, yeah.
Is there any other closing comments that you wanted to make before we go ahead and start wrapping this up?
Um, I guess no, just closing. I mean, I have if you want to hear more about this kind of like talk, I got my podcast, The Bitcoin Capitalist. I try to do it once a week, not guaranteed. It's on Clubhouse right now, but it usually comes out in SoundCloud. So I'll probably send you a link so you can
Yes, I'll post
catch
it
up
down
on
below. Yep.
yeah. Also, I think BSV is still people are just starting to. It's because of the the BTC campaign, media campaign. BSV, the only people in it are the people building stuff because it's the only people who believe in it because hey, look, I see the technology, it's got to work, so I'm just going to do this and ignore everybody else. And so it is still like kind of like a nascent, burgeoning community.
But
So
why
we
is it the
lack a
price going up, Jerry? It's all about the price. Everybody only cares about the price instead of looking at the fact like, oh, well, Ethereum, none of the NFTs are on Ethereum. They're on some server in someone's, business or whatever in their
Yeah.
basement, NFTs are actually being built on BSV. Like everything is actually being built on chain on
Yeah, it's
BSV.
on chain, right? Yeah. The funniest thing, my only answer is, why is the price going up? Well, because the people at Tether don't like BSV. That's why. They don't use their printed money to buy BSV. That's why. It's
It's
not
the only
that.
thing holding it's the only thing holding the price of BTC up at this point. If
Yeah.
something catastrophic happens, let's say, Brock Pierce goes to jail, because I mean, well, he's not the coolest person in the bunch. He's been as we won't go into all of that, but Brock Pierce, the government could go to Tether, try to shut it down. They'll most likely just keep slapping them with fines because they want their cut of it too. They understand that Tether's doing illegal stuff, but they're like, we're going to keep batting a blind eye to this as long as you just keep paying us a little bit here and there. But if something catastrophic were to happen to Tether, it would not be good for BTC at all. So, I mean, it's not a system that I want to be a part of if it's that fragile. Anyway,
Yeah. It's just, if in the scenario where the government is complacent because they're corrupt and letting it happen, then I think in the long run, what will happen is Tether will just keep on the perpetual motion machine, and what you'll have is a giant wealth redistribution machine, because then what's ends up, if this is allowed to go perpetually, what it does is that it pulls wealth, real wealth, out of regular working people, and puts it into a giant pyramid structure where Brock Pierce and his gang is at the top, right? It goes down from there. So of course, pyramid schemes are, how attractive they are, right? The attraction is get in early, and then you get to enjoy the fruits of everybody else's labor.
I think that this can be simplified even further by going as far as saying, if this is allowed to continue, then BTC is going to perpetuate that scenario like we were talking about, where governments become more corrupt because there's more anonymity. And
Yeah.
BSV, if it is allowed to prevail in the way that I think and hope it will, it'll inevitably make government more honest, people more honest. And so really, when you kind of look at it from a fundamental level, it's really good versus evil here. And the
Kind of,
funny
right?
part is that BTC, the people that are all for it right now, they don't even see it as evil. Which, you could look at it from a different sense and say, well, evil disguises itself as good to lure you in. And I think that's what we've got here, is a good versus evil thing, and the people that are being deceived by evil right now don't even realize it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I honestly don't even think the people at the top of BTC realize it's evil, because you really have to understand the long-term economic effects of the narrative that they're pushing. And I don't think they do, because I just honestly think they're just computer geeky guys and academics who just want their privacy and want their anonymity, because they probably read a couple of, like, Rothbard or von Mises books and said, gosh darn, we need a sound money. Hey, I'm all for that. I mean, I read those books too. I like the idea of sound money, but it's a very short, hop from sound money to anti-government, right? I mean, and that's the fine line that you shouldn't cross without really thinking it through. And I don't think a lot of people, even the people at top, think it through.
No. All right, Jerry. Well, I definitely appreciate you coming on the show today. I've had a
My pleasure.
great time speaking with you. But I do think that's going to wrap it up for today, guys. Make sure
Yep.
you hit the like and subscribe button. I'll leave Jerry's information down below so you can check his podcast out. And with that being said, that's going to wrap it
Bitcoin
up.
capitalist.
Have a good evening. We'll see you next time. Bye bye.